composting, this is something you can do on your farms. Cost is pretty minimal, and it gives you a benefit of something you can use on your fields or on your farms. If you can't do that, then you've got landfilling, which nobody wants to do. It's just if you can find a landfill that'll accept the cattle or the carcasses. Incineration, there's one incinerator in the state, I think, that can handle, large carcasses, and the cost for that is really prohibitive, like thousands of dollars to do a cow carcass. And then, there's an alkaline digestion, which I think UW has this facility that they can do that. I don't know anybody else that does it off the top of my head. And then, of course, taking it out in the back 40 and burying it, which we don't recommend because it could wind up affecting your groundwater if you don't do it properly. DACCAP's rules, not the DNR rules, but we reference them. So as a carcass owner or a landowner that has a carcass on it, DACCAP says you can't leave that on the field for longer than 24 hours or 48 hours during the winter. You need to get it taken care of. And the other thing is that you cannot dispose of it in waters of the state. So if your cow dies in the creek, you got to get it out of there so you're not contaminating the waters.
One other thing to add to that, waters of the state can include wetlands as well.
Yeah.
So don't bury them in a wetland.
Yeah, don't bury anything in a wetland.
Are you supposed to be a certain distance away from your streams or?
So we have some best management practices. There's no regulation that says, X number of feet. Do you recall what that best management was? It was like,
I think it was about 250 feet is the recommended distance from a stream. And the biggest thing, like Dan mentioned, is we're going to be more concerned about potentially groundwater contamination, or in that instance, potentially surface water contamination, just depending on, what may or may not be in the carcass itself, whether or not it was a disease or the decomposition could lead to some other things. But like Dan mentioned, we don't have that in our statutes. It's just a best management practice that we would recommend.
Right. So our rules, DNR rules, this is what you guys want to know about. On-farm composting of carcasses is actually exempt from our regulation for the most part. So if you have a cow or pigs or whatever carcasses you need to compost, for the most part, you don't require licensing. We don't require a plan of operation or anything like that. Just some, again, standards that you just follow. Basically, on your farm, you can compost the carcass, any kind of farm residuals like crop residue or whatever like that, manure from your bed pack, yard residuals, which is like leaves and branches and wood chips and things like that. All that can be composted without any issue. All that waste has to be generated on your farm or from an operation that is under common ownership or management. So if you run another farm down the road, you can bring that material down to your farm or an adjacent farm. So if that field down there was not associated with this farm, but why don't you take your material and compost? The compost that you get out of the pile have to be used on a farm. You can't take it and sell it to people for the garden or something like that. It has to be plant spread on a farm. If you have a ruminant animal that you're composting, it has to be used on your farm. You can't take it down the road to the neighbor. I guess that's probably I didn't write the rules, so I'm guessing is why they did a lot of things. I'm assuming it's just so that we don't potentially carry any kind of contaminants to another farm. Oh, that's what I was going to say. So you mentioned diseased animals. Most all of this does not count for diseased animals. Like if you have a diseased cow from the neighboring farm, you cannot transport it to your farm to compost it. And again, that's to maintain cross contamination. You have yard residuals or chipped wood, which we highly recommend chipped wood as carbon base for your composting. If you're accepting that from an off-site source, you have to keep it to less than 10,000 cubic yards of material, which is not hard. Performance standards, these are the ones that, the setbacks that people are looking at. Again, we don't have any numbers that we put into our code about setbacks, but you can't have any detrimental effects on wetlands, on groundwater, surface water. You can't have a take on an endangered species. So if you have a invasive plant, you can't dump your pile on top of the plant.
Yeah.
You want to avoid removing or killing off any endangered or threatened species. And no migration of separate concentrations of explosive gases. We technically, I suppose, the nitrogen that the methane that's being produced by the cow could be gas. A lot of this is for other types of facilities, not really a compost site. Compost sites are not going to push explosive gases into a shed so that it blows up and you turn the light on. And no contamination or no emissions of hazardous dirt. When you build your compost pile, make sure you don't have any contaminants in it. No plastic or glass or metal. Which again, for on-farm composting probably won't be an issue. Again, rules are written really for like the municipal compost site where people are back in their truck and throwing everything into a pile and saying, then the same day, you have to stay 24 hours, the same day. And you should cover the pile with about 6 inches or so, a minimum of 6 inches of either compost that you had already created previously. So you want to keep like a pile of compost set aside so that you have another mortality, you can then cover it up later with that compost. Or something that's high in carbon. Again, wood chips are a great source of carbon. That is pretty high in carbon, but you also have a lot of manure in that, which is going to kind of offset that carbon to nitrogen ratio. Talk about the carbon nitrogen ratio in a minute. And the carcasses have to be covered so that no wild animals are going to get in there and mess with it, or your chocolate lab.
Okay.
You want to cover it up so no dogs or wild animals will get at the carcass.
And I'll just add on, one of the things to keep in mind with either covering with wood chips or your finished compost is one of the reasons for that is one for the animals or whatnot, but also for any smells associated with it. Part of my role for the waste program, I'm a complaint coordinator, and I can say that probably the number one complaint we get on composting, regardless of the type, is smell. So that wood chip layer over top or compost layer over top is going to act as like a biofilter. It helps keep some of that smell in. And so that way you guys don't have to hopefully have any bad neighbors. Another important thing that we'll talk about is location picking. This spot is good. There's not a house right there. We don't want anything. We just want to be conscientious of your neighbors, although it's not one of the performance standards. We really don't want to have to create any sort of like nuisance conditions for those around us as well.
So the material that you're composting should be thoroughly mixed so that you're getting enough oxygen into the pile. So the way compost works, and Josh might kind of go over this, this is called aerobic digestion. So it's with air, with oxygen. If you don't get enough oxygen in the pile, then it'll go anaerobic, and that's where you get that smell. That's where that ammonia smell or that rotten egg smell will come from. So you want to make sure that your pile is well mixed. You're going to get to turning it with more oxygen in, so that bugs that are in there can break down the material and not have an odor issue. So the windrow height and the distance around it should be appropriate for the machinery that you have. So if you're going to come out with a front end loader, you got to be able to get around your pile with the front end loader. If you want it taller than what you can reach. Temperatures we'll talk about probably a little bit more, but if you don't have one, you can get yourself a thermometer. These things are like around $120, I think, online. The idea with the temperature, you want to come and take readings on them quite frequently, so that you make sure that it is heating up. If it's not heating up, then there's no composting going on, and you just have carcass covered up with wood chips. You need to get to 150 degrees. You want to get to 150 degrees at least 15 days, and during that time period, when it's hitting that 150 degrees, you want to turn it at least 5 times to keep the oxygen in it, and that'll help to break things down really fast. Now, with carcasses, there's a caveat to that you don't want to turn it for at least, like, depending on the size of the carcass, probably about 40 to 60 days before you turn it once, because you're going to have a carcass in there and you don't want to uncover it. So you want to let it break down. Moisture content, which shouldn't really be an issue with having a carcass compost. You need it to be around 50 to 60% moisture. Again, the bugs that are breaking down the material in there need water to live. If it's too wet in there, you're going to be drowning them out, and pile will go anaerobic. If it's not moist enough, the bug will die off and it'll just sit there without composting.
The good news on that is that the bugs that break down the material will come back once they get enough oxygen and moisture. So if your pile goes stale, so to say, or die, it will bounce right back as soon as it gets the conditions that it needs. A good way to measure moisture, not that like Dan mentioned, you probably won't need to do this for carcasses, but if you're thinking about manure or yard waste or food residual composting, is doing a squeeze test that sticks to your hands. There's a little bit of glistening on your hands. That's about like a damp sponge. That's what you're looking for. You can squeeze water out of it. It's too wet. And if your hand's not a little bit damp, then it's probably too dry. Keep that in mind. Also, if you're composting, carcasses or manure, squeeze at your own risk.
Yeah. Maybe want to use gloves. One thing you can do is when you build the pile, normally your pile is going to have that kind of that dome shape. If the pile is getting dry, what you can do is when you build the pile, make it so that it's got a little dip to the top of it, and then if it rains, the rainwater will soak into it. Whereas if it's like this, the rainwater will just shed right off of it, and you won't get water in it. The other thing you could bring out, if you have a water tank, a water truck, you can pull it and bring it out here. And ideally, what you can do is get make like a pipe with holes in it. You can screw onto the hose and inject the water into the pile. Again, if you just spray it on top, it's going to run off, and the inside of the pile will still be dry, and it won't help your compost at all. Or you bring your front end loader and lift it up and spray inside there, or spray it as you're turning it to get the moisture inside the pile.
Yeah, I was curious, what if there were some liquid sources, that we have that could come out.
Or like if you have, you want to pump a little out of your lagoon.
Sure.
And use that. Yeah, that is, as long as you get moisture in it, it doesn't have to be like tap water. Yes, that's all good.
Or sometimes even if fresh dead pack that you
Yeah.
that has
That has
a little bit higher moisture content. Usually you don't need to soak a pile like all the way through.
No.
You're also going to want to think about potential runoff, which we'll talk about in a bit, but we're going to want to try to avoid that. That's why, the damp sponge idea works well. You don't want it too wet or you'll drown out the things that need to make your compost.
This next slide is really talking about that temperature that I was just talking about. The reason you want to get those temperatures up again is you want to kill off any pathogens that might be in there. You want to kill off any weed seeds that might have gotten in there. So if you spread it on your field later, you're not spreading weeds. And you want it to be stabilized whenever you're done with it. So after the pile is done, you think it's got to hit those numbers, and then it's going to just start to taper off. The temperature's going to taper off, and they'll kind of hit like an ambient temperature, or maybe just a little bit warmer than the air. At that point, you're pretty much done. If it's still hot and you spread it on your field, you could wind up blowing off your crops because it's gonna burn up your crops. So yeah, you want to make sure that it's done cooking before you use it. So that's kind of a good thing to let it sit maybe for a year, or if you have space for it. The last thing here is, operate in a nuisance-free and environmentally sound manner. So that's mostly that odor issue, but also runoff. You don't want to have, which we'll talk about in our design. The bones,
There's a question.
they'll get really brittle, after a couple of months. If they are still there after you're finished, you can just throw them back in the next pile, and they'll help again with that airspace velocity thing.
I was just to an animal compost site. This was a commercial site a few weeks ago, though, and they run it through one time, and they might have a big piece of like pelvis, depending on the animals that they're using, but for the most part, the bones end up breaking down within that 6 months, and then I think they let it sit for another 6 months to 8 months before they spread on fields. But they didn't seem to have any problems, and they were spreading right next to where they were running their operation. So
You want your runoff from the pile. You want your pile up on a high area like this, so that you have a gently sloped grass vegetated area for any runoff from the pile to go through before it gets to neighboring properties or streams or wetlands or anything like that, so that it has a chance for anything that might run off of the pile, any kind of leachate or anything that might be there, give it a chance to infiltrate into the ground before leaving your property. If you don't have space before your neighboring property, you could do like some berms or a retention pond or something like that to catch the stuff. Again, you want to be a good neighbor. You don't want your materials flowing off your property onto your neighbors or into a environmentally sensitive area like in streams or wetlands. The best management practices like slope vegetation, ditches, and stuff like that, again, should be used anytime you see any problems. So you should come out and check it maybe once every 3 months or so during a rain event. Come out and see if you have stuff flowing off the pile. If you do and it's getting off your property, that's a good chance for you to adjust how things are going. So put up a compost sock or a berm or something to keep the material from going off the site. It should also be sloped enough that you're not getting any ponding under the compost pile. You don't want the pile sitting in water while it's composting. It's kind of the same with that moisture content. You don't want it too wet. And if it's ponding, then that water has potential of getting down into the groundwater, which could affect your well or your neighbor's well.
So what you can do to avoid ponding is if you have a gently sloped area, just would have to be like a 2 to 4% slope, not very steep. You can run your piles in line with the slope. So like parallel with that slope rather than perpendicular, because if you run it perpendicular to the slope, each pile is going to end up catching that runoff water and lead to more ponding around the piles then.
And also, yeah, you should have your piles should be, again, kind of at the high point so that you don't have water with rain running into the pile. Again, slope it, or lay out your windrows so that you don't have water running into the pile. That just helps to avoid those issues. You should have enough space, again, to have your windrows, any feedstocks you might want. Like if you wanted to get a big pile of wood chips up here, just ready in case something happens, or you want to have keep a big pile of your finished compost to put on top of your next mortality. That's a good thing. You don't want to let the compost. You don't want to have a huge pile of compost just sitting here for years either. Though, you want to use it. Again, maybe keep a small pile to top off or cap off your next compost pile, but you don't want to stockpile like years worth of compost. Other considerations, there are other programs. So we're with the waste program in the department. There are other programs like stormwater, wastewater that may have issues with your operation. If you're disturbing more than an acre, you will probably need a stormwater permit.
So, like Dan was mentioning, we're one part of the DNR in the waste program. There's a variety of different programs, and we do not expect you guys to know every single program and every single regulator.
We don't. So.
Yeah, we don't. So it's not really fair to expect that of anyone else. Just keeping in mind, when you're picking your site, if you're going to be disturbing, and by disturbing, it could be just as simple as, clearing the vegetative layer and getting down to dirt. An acre or more in size, then you're going to need a stormwater construction permit. That is a pretty short permit, but you do have to go through that stormwater program to get that permit. And I don't know what size farms you guys all run, but if there's any that would meet the CAFO, you guys will probably need to work with our wastewater or CAFO program and make sure that you're getting your nutrient management plans updated as well, either through that CAFO program or potentially through NRCS or the county. As we've mentioned, there's multiple regulatory agencies, and that oftentimes feels like a lot of red tape, but we want to make sure that we make everyone aware of those other agencies that may play a role outside of the DNR even. So make sure you're checking in with your local regulators, whether that's zoning or potentially even your extension office, and really try to avoid, areas within 300 feet of a navigable waterway. That's going to likely kick into your shoreline zoning and your floodplains as well, surrounding waterways. We want to make sure we're avoiding those. And those kind of speak back to, we don't want any detrimental effects on any of our surface water or groundwater there. We don't require any licenses for this type of activity, but we're happy to, if you guys have an idea, send it to us if we can let you know what we're thinking, or if we'd recommend you reach out to anyone else.
Well, so compost has a way of connecting with crops and soils. That's my interest, is how can we manage this as a nutrient source when we're using it back on our landscape? The composting of mortalities is very similar, right? It's a balance of, do you remember the ingredients that we need? Carbon, nitrogen, water, and air, and specifically oxygen. Yep. So if we can have the balance of carbon and nitrogen, the moisture and oxygen, we have what we need to cook this and put it through a composting process. Okay, and the end result is going to be unique for what we started with. More of a manure composting system is going to have a lot of nutrients in it. You'll see that within your folder. We actually are condensing those nutrients even more and making that a very dense product, a little bit more stable product as well. So there's some benefits in doing that. But when we're starting with a lot of nutrients, we're going to have a lot of nutrients at the end. So we just need to be aware of that when we're using that back on the landscape. Before we do too much more, I do want to introduce Andrew, our host farmer today. Thank you, Andrew. And he's going to share just a little bit about, maybe what he's got going on, some of the products that are here. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the composting process after that.
All right, in the back half here is where we bury the animals. We've done it for probably 4 years now. And we just use bedding pack to get started with, and then whatever other manure we got. I always keep some manure up here to bury the animals, and then we probably don't turn them as much as we should, just whenever we get back here and have one guy that we carry, we do a little turning. And then in the fall, we haul a bunch out until we hit the big bombs, and then kind of like you guys were discussing earlier, kind of throw them in a pile and let them break down more. But I don't know, there's a lot to it. It isn't rocket science. We just add manure and I don't know, that's about it. Some old hay we'll put in and bedding, and that's about it. Well, and, I mean, it's nice in the winter too, because obviously it throws a lot of heat where you can always bury them and get rid of them. So that's a plus to get them out of here. Just the problem we have here is in the winter, we got to put a lot of manure on them because otherwise the coyotes get up here. But that's about it. You bury them deep enough, it's not as big a problem.
It was the second time that the composting process has been described as not rocket science, right? Yeah. Luckily for us, our part of it's not rocket science, is it? But what's going on inside is pretty close to, right? So it's just up to us to keep those ingredients in mind when we're putting that in. And then the microbes are going to do the work for us. They're going to do the hard work of breaking down, those products that we put in and making that a more stable nutrient source. A test that we can do, any state lab will run a nutrient profile on basically any type of product that you want to land apply. The caveat with the manure analysis is the information is, it goes back to a set of data that lists it on what's the availability of that compared to all of our years of research in field study. Okay, so to be upfront, we don't know what the nutrient availability of compost nutrients are. Okay, so if we're going to be using, a manure analysis, which is a good tool if we're starting with a manure type product, just I guess be aware that the total nutrients that we're putting out there, and then what is shown as being plant available. So if you kind of look at that line, that first piece is what the total nutrients are. As you move to the right, that's going to show what is available in the first year. So for potassium and for phosphorus, we're only going to get 80% of those nutrients are plant available. We are doing work and trying to figure out and understand if we put manure or some other product through a composting process, do we raise that amount that's available to the plant? Okay, so stay tuned. I'm very excited about doing some of that work. And then the other piece is on the nitrogen side. So we know that one of the ingredients for making compost is nitrogen. Okay, so if we bring a manure product out and compost it, you'll kind of see on that, if you flip it from front to back, we do use some nitrogen in the process. Okay, do we use too much to make it as maybe a reason to not compost? I would suggest no. We're making that into a more stable nitrogen product at the end. But the stability of that is that other piece. We're not quite sure. Do we need to incorporate compost to keep the N in the system? The report that you have does show if you incorporate after so many hours, your N is such. If you don't incorporate, the N goes down because we lose some that volatilizes into the air. Okay, so those are the two areas that if I'm showing you that based off of a manure analysis, but just be open, I guess, to, you know, keeping up with soil testing on your farm, keeping up with monitoring the yields wherever we use some of this composted product. We very well might see that it's going to affect, you know, the nutrients in our soil and our plant growth differently than a manure only product would. About getting started, I'm very thankful for the message today. Hopefully that left us all with, you know, a little bit of eagerness to maybe go home and try this, right? If we have some manure that we want to clean out, maybe out of a pen before we start calving, or before we need to bring some animals in and we can't field apply, it's a really good place, like Andrew mentioned, to get started. Hopefully we don't need the mortality side, but my grandfather instructed me early on, if you have livestock, you have dead stock. All right, so I think if we can incorporate, you know, the composting within some experience that we have with these products that are on our farm all the time, that gives us a little bit of an upper edge to be able to understand how this works. Okay, the guidelines that you'll see in the information within your folder and within the handout are very good. Okay, but getting some experience with it is really what is most important, and then being able to come to this pile and recognize what's going on. Okay, so a thermometer is a really good tool. You said this was reading about 100. That would tell us that this pile, you know, has the potential, you know, to go through more of a composting process. What would you guess is maybe missing as an ingredient in this site why we don't maybe have the temperature? Oxygen? Moisture? We can maybe learn some by looking, but if we're not getting that temperature built up, we want to think about what those ingredients are and whether we need to, you know, change those. So my eye, I guess, from some experience I have personally, tells me that this has almost all the ingredients it needs. You have some of that long length. Knowing that it's a manure type source, we know that it has some of the nitrogen mixed in there. I want to have a donut later too, so I'm not gonna. But you know, the moisture is probably close. All right. So maybe what it needs is some more oxygen. Maybe this pack is just settled, and some of that porosity, some of that pore space is kind of gone. All right. So and that's where we can you know, find something that works for us to turn the pile over. Okay. If we're coming up here with the tractor loader or the skid loader, that's good. All we need to do is just kind of turn that and get some oxygen in it, kind of freshen it up. Kind of try to keep track of where you're moving your pile and try to get it all kind of turned if you can. Okay. And really, Andrew mentioned, like, you know, the timing and how often you turn. Really, all that is based on, you know, what is your goal and when do you want to get there. Okay, so the more time and effort you put into it, the quicker you're going to get to that final product. Okay, but if you don't quite have the time to do that, just, I guess, just understand that it's going to just take a little bit longer for that to get there. Because the comment was made that, you know, if this pile would lose one of its key ingredients, we can add that back to it, and then the process will start again. Okay, so we don't need to do anything too fancy besides be able to monitor the nutrients and monitor the inputs that we need to make to the pile. And then I would really recommend, you know, let's try to understand what the nutrients are of this coming out, and try to put that back into our nutrient management plan. Okay, if you don't have a formal plan, you know, you could consider that. The Snap Plus tool is really good at being able to put things in and keep track of it within our soil system. Otherwise, there's also a lot of really good recommendations if you have more limited acres and you just want to know, okay, I have this product. How much should I spread when I'm going to grow alfalfa there for the next 4 years? Okay, so there's a lot of things that we can learn and understand about our finished product that'll help us also meet our cropping goal. Okay, I don't know what mortality compost nutrients are. Animals, all living beings, are going to be pretty high in nitrogen. Okay, so that's why, you know, the suggestion was made to add that carbon source. Okay, we know we're starting with the situation that's a little bit higher in nitrogen, so we need to complement the system with that carbon source. What's that end product going to be? It's going to be based off of what you put in it. Okay, so if you have pigs and cattle and chickens and calves and older cows, all that is going to make your compost unique compared to maybe somebody else's that has the different inputs in that system. Okay, and what you're using as a carbon source will make a difference not only in how fast it breaks down or if the ratio is right, but it'll also make a difference on what you have at the end. Okay, so we can make compost from, you know, lower nutrient inputs, leaves, grass clippings, different pieces of wood and such. But that's just going to be a different type product when we're done at the end. Okay, there are some compost nutrient profiles. I believe Ag Source has one. I have not run a sample to know, is that giving me more helpful information to then use in the field. Might be something to consider though if you are getting into more composting and you want to try to dial in, you know, what are the nutrients that are available here to take to my crop. So I would encourage just maybe checking that out. As of now though, the guidance is to use just a standard manure nutrient analysis, and then put that, you know, back into your cropping system. Knowing how much we apply is always like the key piece when we're using any type of nutrient source. When we compost it, it's going to get a lot more dense, okay? Not only by nutrients, but also by the way it's going to fill into the spreader. So if you can, we have weigh pads.
Yep.
There's weigh pads. So if you can, we can help calibrate a spreader. So we'll weigh it. We'll obviously sample the material. We'll take it to the field and spread it. We'll get an idea of the area that you spread. And as long as you can fill the spreader similar, you know, we only have to do that like about once, okay? Until you're going to switch to like a different type of material, then we're going to want to do that again. So reach out, land conservation, extension, nutrient and pest management program is another good supporter with a lot of information on how to calibrate your manure spreader, because we want to take advantage of all these nutrients. If we can put this out on 40 acres instead of 20, you know, maybe there's an advantage to do that for our crops. Okay? I don't know the answer. But good news, I'm not going anywhere. I plan on finding the answer. So connect with Tanya. She's the one that's going to receive some of these extra resources, that things that I'm thinking about as we had this conversation today. So things that can give you some more tools, you know, to evaluate what do I have on my farm that I can mix together and start a composting project, right? There's a lot of reasons to consider, you know, having some sort of a composting manure set up on your farms, whether it's being able to go to that pile instead of the field. Maybe it's like a February time frame and you want to clean out a pen. Perhaps it makes more sense to go to a site where you can control those nutrients a little more instead of going to the field, where maybe there's that risk of runoff and such. Obviously value your time, right? Your time for hauling it here, your time for turning it, your time for taking it back out on the field. One other consideration is what crops can we go on with composted manure or mortalities that we can't go on with straight manure? Can we go on some of our forage crops? Can we go on some of our pastures? All right, there's some things to give some value to as well. But that'd be the one area I guess I would encourage you to think about is what time frame can I take my nutrients from the farm and go to more of a composting site instead of directly to the field. Maybe summer is another good time, right? When our crops are growing, we don't have quite the access. The core of a round bale, right? And maybe this has lost quite a bit of its feed value, but that's a good place to bring it to this, right? The microbes here love this to be able to help break down. So yeah, I think that's a great point. Like anything that we scrape up like around bale feeders or such, put it through a process first. Obviously, evaluate your time and your input, but I would encourage you to try.
All right.
Like just keep composting them until they break down.
I think there's a reality that the large mature animals, it's going to be a problem, and I would, if you can sort that somehow, it's not going to break down any faster if you take the field. It's just going to get picked up when you bale hay, or it's going to get hit by the corn planter. So a way to collect those and bring those back, if we can get that material smaller, it can definitely go to the field. All right, it would be an excellent calcium source. But we probably don't need to buy the equipment that can break that bone down. We probably need to figure out some ways to bring that back into our system, subject it to maybe a more intense turning or a more intense process. I just don't have the answer for that today. Smaller, younger animals, you won't have an issue with bones. Okay. The comment was made about other alternatives. A Biovator is kind of what that vessel, that's like a name brand for one of those vessel composters. And I believe there is some cost share with NRCS, okay, for Wisconsin. When you enter into one of those agreements, though, understand that, your whole farm often comes underneath the standards. All right, so just kind of have that understanding that if there's another piece of your farm that has a resource concern, NRCF is going to want to assist you with meeting that before they're able to cost share, some type of a project or system. Oftentimes there also is like a engineering plan that may be more than what we need in this setting, right? Because it was shared that we don't need a license necessarily. There isn't a lot of oversight. So just kind of be aware of those things as well. If that's something you want to do a lot, or you want to do you want to bring material from other farms, that might make sense to look at it for that setting. Yeah, question for you on some of the green material that mixes up. How are you handling that? How would you like to handle that?
Well, if I turned it more, it probably wouldn't be an issue. I don't turn it enough. So, I mean, that's the answer, is to be turning some more.
But there's no reason, though, Aaron, why we can't turn living green material back into the compost. Be aware if there's viable seed on it, we're going to have to then break that seed down. But no, I think there's some type of connection between like finished compost and making it green. It just has a different visual. Yeah, we can throw almost any type of seed on here and it'll grow, right? So, but what is our goal? We're trying to break this down and get it to a different form. Once it's done, if we're storing it somewhere and we want it to be more aesthetically pleasing, throw some seed on it. Okay, it's not going to have any detrimental impact as long as you know what that seed is and where that might go to next.